I never imagined that standing in the marble foyer of my childhood mansion, watching my father's face transform from smug satisfaction to absolute horror, would be the moment I finally understood the true meaning of poetic justice. The Cartier engagement ring on my finger caught the light from the crystal chandelier as my mother dropped her champagne flute, the crystal shattering against the Italian marble floor in perfect synchronization with her carefully constructed world. But what made that moment truly unforgettable wasn't just the shock on my parents' faces when they realized the construction worker they had humiliated and banished from their estate 6 months earlier was actually the CEO of the largest infrastructure development company on the West Coast. It was the quiet satisfaction of watching them scramble to reclaim a daughter they had disowned, suddenly desperate to repair bridges they had burned with such theatrical cruelty. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Charlotte Pemberton, and until 8 months ago, I believed I was living the perfect life that my parents had meticulously designed for me. The Pemberton family had built their fortune in California real estate over 4 generations, starting with my great-great-grandfather who had the foresight to purchase vast tracts of land in what would eventually become Silicon Valley. By the time I was born, the family portfolio included luxury developments, commercial properties, and exclusive resort communities stretching from Malibu to Monterey. Growing up in the sprawling Pemberton estate in Atherton, I was surrounded by every privilege money could provide: private tutors, equestrian lessons, summers in the Hamptons, winters in Aspen. My parents, Victoria and Harrison Pemberton, had raised me with crystal-clear expectations about my role in preserving and expanding the family legacy. I would attend Stanford, major in business or economics, marry someone from an appropriate family with complementary assets, and eventually take my place in the carefully orchestrated world of high society philanthropy and strategic business partnerships. For 26 years, I had followed this blueprint with minimal resistance. Stanford MBA, check. Associate position at Pemberton Holdings, check. Engagement to Bradley Ashworth III. Heir to a pharmaceutical fortune and my parents' hand-picked choice for the perfect merger of family dynasties, check. The wedding was scheduled for the following spring at the family estate, with 500 guests representing the cream of California's social and business elite. Bradley was everything my parents could have wanted in a son-in-law. Handsome, in that patrician way that suggested generations of good breeding, impeccably educated, connected to all the right families, and completely uninterested in disrupting any existing power structures. Our relationship was pleasant, predictable, and utterly devoid of passion or genuine connection. We attended the same charity events, vacationed at the same exclusive resorts, and discussed our future with the clinical efficiency of business partners reviewing a merger agreement. I told myself that love was a luxury that people in my position couldn't afford to prioritize. Real partnerships were built on shared values, compatible backgrounds, and mutual benefit to both families involved. Passion was temporary, but social position and financial security were permanent. My parents had reminded me of these truths so consistently throughout my life that I had internalized them as fundamental wisdom, rather than recognizing them as carefully constructed limitations designed to ensure my compliance. The first crack in this perfect facade appeared on a Tuesday morning in March, when I decided to take an uncharacteristic detour through downtown San Jose on my way to a client meeting. Traffic on the main route was gridlocked due to construction, and my GPS had routed me through a neighborhood I had never seen before, despite living in the Bay Area my entire life. I found myself stopped at a red light next to a construction site where a massive mixed-use development was taking shape. The project was impressive, clearly designed with both aesthetic appeal and environmental sustainability in mind. What caught my attention, however, wasn't the architecture, but the man directing a team of workers near the main entrance. He moved with the kind of quiet authority that suggested natural leadership rather than inherited position. Tall and lean with dark hair and the kind of tan that came from actual outdoor work rather than resort vacations, he wore a hard hat, steel-toed boots, and a construction vest over a simple white t-shirt. As I watched, he listened intently to concerns from several team members, then walked them through what appeared to be a modification to their approach, his gestures confident and precise. There was something magnetic about his presence, a combination of competence, accessibility, and genuine engagement with the people around him that was entirely different from the performative leadership I was accustomed to seeing in my family's business circles. When he looked up and caught me staring from my car window, our eyes met for perhaps 3 seconds before the light changed and traffic began moving again. I spent the rest of the day unable to shake the image of those 3 seconds. Not just his appearance, though he was undeniably attractive, but the quality of attention in his gaze. Most people in my social circle looked at me and saw Charlotte Pemberton, heiress and future Ashworth wife. This stranger had simply seen me, without context or expectation, and something in that brief connection felt more real than most of my carefully choreographed social interactions. 2 weeks later, I found myself deliberately driving past the construction site again, telling myself I was simply curious about the project's progress. The development was indeed impressive, featuring sustainable design elements and community spaces that suggested thoughtful planning beyond mere profit maximization. I pulled into a nearby coffee shop, ostensibly to review some documents, but actually hoping to catch another glimpse of the man who had captured my attention. He entered the coffee shop 20 minutes later, still wearing his work clothes but having traded the hard hat for a baseball cap. I watched as he ordered his coffee with the same attentive courtesy he had shown his construction team, thanking the barista by name and asking about her upcoming final exams. The interaction was brief but genuine, revealing someone who noticed and cared about the people around him rather than simply moving through the world focused exclusively on his own concerns. When he turned to find a seat, our eyes met again, and this time he smiled with a warmth that sent an unexpected flutter through my chest. Before I could overthink the impulse, I gestured to the empty chair at my table. "I'm sorry if this sounds strange," I said as he approached, "but I've been watching the construction project across the street, and I'm genuinely impressed by what you're building there. The design integration with the existing neighborhood is really thoughtful." His smile broadened as he settled into the chair across from me. "Thank you. That's exactly what we were hoping to achieve. I'm David Chen, project supervisor." He extended a calloused hand that engulfed mine in a firm, warm handshake. "Charlotte," I replied, deliberately omitting my last name. "I work in real estate development, so I appreciate good design when I see it." What followed was the most engaging conversation I had experienced in months, possibly years. David spoke passionately about sustainable construction practices, community-centered development, and the importance of creating spaces that enhanced rather than displaced existing neighborhoods. His knowledge was impressive, his perspective thoughtful, and his obvious dedication to his work refreshing after years of listening to Bradley discuss pharmaceutical patents with the enthusiasm of someone reading a grocery list. More importantly, David asked questions about my opinions on various design elements and listened to my responses with genuine interest. He didn't interrupt, didn't mansplain concepts I already understood, and didn't treat my comments as charming, but ultimately irrelevant observations from someone whose primary value lay in her family connections rather than her professional expertise. We talked for over an hour before I reluctantly had to leave for an appointment. As I gathered my things, David hesitated for a moment before asking if I would be interested in having dinner sometime. "I'd like that very much," I heard myself saying, surprising us both with the sincerity in my voice. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. We exchanged phone numbers, and I drove away feeling more energized and genuinely happy than I had in recent memory. It wasn't until I was halfway home that the full implications of what I had just agreed to began to sink in. I was engaged to Bradley Ashworth III. My parents had spent months planning what they considered the social event of the season. I had just agreed to have dinner with a construction worker whose last name I didn't even know. The rational response would have been to call David immediately and politely cancel, explaining that I had spoken impulsively and that my circumstances made dating impossible. Instead, I found myself looking forward to our dinner with an anticipation that bordered on giddiness, feeling more alive than I had in years. That evening at home, as I sat through another tedious dinner conversation with my parents about wedding preparations and Bradley's family's expectations for the ceremony, I kept thinking about David's laugh and the way his eyes had lit up when discussing his work. The contrast between his authentic passion and the performative enthusiasm that characterized most of my social interactions was stark and increasingly difficult to ignore. "Charlotte, darling, you seem distracted tonight," my mother observed, with the sharp attention to detail that made her such a formidable presence in San Francisco society. "I hope you're not having second thoughts about the spring wedding timeline. The Ashworths are quite firm about the date, and we've already committed to the venue." "No second thoughts about the timeline," I replied carefully, which was technically true since my second thoughts were about the marriage itself rather than its scheduling. My father looked up from his perfectly prepared salmon with the satisfied expression he wore when discussing family strategy. Bradley mentioned that his father is interested in exploring some joint ventures between Ashworth Pharmaceuticals and our medical property developments. The merger potential extends well beyond the personal relationship. There it was, the underlying truth that everyone acknowledged but never stated directly. My marriage to Bradley wasn't primarily about love or compatibility. It was a business arrangement that would benefit both families, and my personal feelings were relevant only insofar as they supported or threatened that arrangement. I excused myself early that evening, claiming fatigue, and retreated to my room to stare at David's contact information in my phone. Common sense dictated that I delete his number and forget about the attractive construction supervisor who had momentarily disrupted my carefully planned life. Instead, I found myself composing and deleting text messages, trying to find the right balance between interest and casualness. Finally, I settled on something simple. "Thank you for the lovely conversation today. I'm looking forward to dinner. Would Friday work for you?" His response came within minutes. "Friday would be perfect. I know a great little Italian place in downtown Campbell if that sounds good to you." Campbell was 40 minutes from Atherton, far enough from my usual haunts that we were unlikely to encounter anyone from my social circle. The practical part of my mind noted this as a strategic advantage, while another part wondered when I had started thinking about dinner with an attractive man in terms of strategic risk management. The rest of the week passed in a strange dual existence. During the day, I maintained my normal routine of work, family obligations, and wedding planning with Bradley and our mothers. I attended a tasting at the caterer, reviewed floral arrangements, and discussed seating charts with the same dutiful attention I had always brought to such tasks. But underneath the familiar rhythm of my prescribed life, I felt a current of anticipation and nervous energy that was entirely new. I caught myself thinking about David at odd moments throughout the week. While reviewing property development proposals, I wondered what his perspective would be on the environmental impact assessments. During a particularly tedious discussion about wedding favors, I found myself imagining what it would be like to have a conversation with someone who was genuinely excited about his work. When Bradley kissed me goodnight after a dinner with both sets of parents, I felt nothing but polite tolerance and found myself wondering what it would feel like to be kissed by someone who actually desired me, rather than simply fulfilling social expectations. Friday evening arrived with unseasonable warmth for March in Northern California. I had changed clothes 3 times, settling finally on a simple navy dress that was elegant without being ostentatious, paired with understated jewelry and minimal makeup. I told my parents I was having dinner with college friends in Palo Alto, a lie that came surprisingly easily given my general commitment to honesty. The Italian restaurant David had chosen was exactly the kind of place I would never have discovered on my own. Small, family-owned, with checkered tablecloths, and the kind of authentic atmosphere that couldn't be manufactured by high-end designers. David was waiting at a corner table when I arrived, having traded his construction clothes for dark jeans and a blue button-down shirt that brought out his eyes. He stood as I approached, a courtesy that had become rare in my experience with men my age. "You look beautiful," he said simply, and something in his tone made me believe he meant it rather than simply offering the compliment that social convention required. "Thank you. This place is charming," I replied, looking around at the warm lighting and family photos covering the walls. "How did you discover it?" "My crew and I come here sometimes after finishing big projects. Maria, the owner, treats us like family." He gestured toward a middle-aged woman behind the counter who waved enthusiastically when she spotted him. The evening that followed was a revelation in multiple ways. David was educated, well-traveled, and remarkably well-read despite what I was beginning to realize were my own classist assumptions about construction workers. He had studied civil engineering at UC Berkeley, spent 2 years working on infrastructure projects in developing countries after graduation, and spoke passionately about using construction and development as tools for community empowerment rather than merely profit generation. More surprisingly, he asked thoughtful questions about my work and listened to my responses with the kind of attention that made me feel genuinely heard. Most people in my social circle either dismissed my professional opinions as hobby interests that would naturally be abandoned after marriage, or they patronized me with exaggerated praise that felt more insulting than genuine criticism would have been. "What draws you to real estate development?" David asked as we shared a bottle of wine that was better than anything I had expected to find in such a modest restaurant. The question caught me off guard because no one had ever asked it before. My career path had been assumed rather than chosen, a natural extension of family business rather than personal passion. "Honestly, I'm not sure anyone has ever asked me that before," I admitted. "I grew up expecting to work in the family business, so I've never really examined whether it's something I genuinely want to do or simply something I've been conditioned to accept." "And now that you're thinking about it?" he prompted gently. I considered the question seriously, perhaps for the first time in my life. I think what I enjoy most is the potential to create spaces that genuinely improve people's lives. But so much of what my family develops is focused on exclusivity and profit margins rather than community benefit. Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to work on projects that prioritized different values. Like what? Affordable housing that doesn't compromise on design quality. Mixed-income communities that integrate rather than segregate different economic levels. Development that strengthens existing neighborhoods rather than displacing them. I paused, surprised by my own candor. I've never said any of that out loud before. David's smile was warm and encouraging. Those are exactly the kinds of projects that drew me to this work. There's so much potential to use development as a force for good rather than just wealth accumulation. The conversation continued in this vein throughout dinner, touching on everything from sustainable building practices to urban planning philosophy to the social responsibility of developers. I found myself expressing opinions and ideas that I hadn't even realized I possessed, feeling intellectually stimulated in a way that was entirely new. As the evening wound down, David walked me to my car, a sleek BMW that looked absurdly out of place in the restaurant's modest parking lot. If he noticed the contrast between my vehicle and the setting, he didn't comment on it. "I had a wonderful time tonight," he said as we paused beside my car. "Would you be interested in doing this?" "Again?" "Yes," I replied without hesitation, then added more honestly, "More than I probably should be." He tilted his head curiously. "What does that mean?" I hesitated, recognizing that this was the moment to either be honest about my circumstances or continue the deception by omission that had characterized the evening. It means my life is more complicated than I've led you to believe. Complicated how? Standing in the warm evening air, looking into David's genuinely concerned eyes, I made a decision that would alter the trajectory of everything that followed. I'm engaged, I said quietly, to someone my parents chose for me. The wedding is planned for this spring. David's expression shifted through several emotions before settling into something that looked like disappointment mixed with understanding. And you're having second thoughts? I'm having first thoughts, I corrected. I don't think I've ever genuinely considered what I wanted from a partner or a marriage until tonight. He was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. What are you going to do? I don't know, I admitted. My entire life has been planned for me, and I've never questioned whether those plans aligned with my actual desires. Tonight was the first time I've felt like myself in conversation with someone, rather than playing a role I've been assigned. David stepped closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne and see the gold flecks in his brown eyes. Charlotte, I don't know what your circumstances are or what obligations you feel bound by, but I hope you'll consider whether the life you're planning is the life you actually want to live. Before I could respond, he leaned down and kissed me, softly and tentatively at first, then with increasing warmth as I responded. The kiss was everything that my interactions with Bradley were not: passionate, genuine, and electric in a way that made my entire body come alive. When we separated, I felt disoriented, as if I had been sleepwalking for years and had suddenly awakened to find myself in a completely different world. I should go, I managed, though every instinct was urging me to stay. Will I see you again? David asked. I hope so, I replied, meaning it more than I had ever meant anything in my carefully controlled life. I drove home in a daze, my lips still tingling from David's kiss, and my mind reeling from the recognition that everything I had accepted as inevitable about my future might actually be a series of choices I had never acknowledged making. The Pemberton estate was dark when I arrived, my parents having retired early after what my father had undoubtedly considered a successful evening of business networking at one of their charity events. I slipped into the house quietly and made my way to my room, grateful to avoid any immediate interrogation about my evening. Sitting on my bed, still wearing the navy dress that had felt so perfect for my dinner with David, I stared at the engagement. Ring Bradley had presented to me 6 months earlier. The 3-carat diamond was flawless, set in platinum, and had cost more than most people earned in a year. It was exactly the kind of ring that was expected for someone in my position, chosen more for its social significance than for any personal meaning. For the first time since accepting Bradley's proposal, I seriously considered what my life would look like in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years if I continued on my current path. Married to a man I felt no passion for, participating in the same social events with the same people discussing the same topics, raising children who would be groomed for the same predetermined roles in the same exclusive world. The prospect filled me with a kind of existential claustrophobia that I had never experienced before. It wasn't that the life was objectively terrible. Many people would have considered it privileged beyond imagination. But it was a life chosen by other people for their own reasons, and I was beginning to understand that I had never been consulted about whether it was a life I actually wanted to live. I pulled out my phone and looked at David's contact information. Again. In a few hours, I would need to resume my normal routine, attending a weekend family brunch where my mother would undoubtedly quiz me about wedding planning details, and my father would discuss business strategies that assumed my compliance with all family expectations. But for this moment, alone in my childhood bedroom wearing a dress chosen for a secret dinner with a man who had made me feel more alive in one evening than my fiancé had in 2 years of dating, I allowed myself to imagine what it might feel like to make my own choices about my own life. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. I fell asleep that night still wearing David's kiss on my lips, and woke the next morning with a clarity that surprised me. I was going to see him again, regardless of the complications it might create. For the first time in my life, I was going to prioritize what I wanted over what was expected of me. The decision felt like stepping off a cliff, but also like finally learning to fly. Over the following 3 weeks, I lived a double life that became increasingly difficult to maintain. During the days, I attended wedding planning meetings with my mother and Bradley's mother, Eleanor Ashworth, a formidable woman who approached social events with the strategic precision of a military campaign. I smiled appropriately while discussing flower arrangements, nodded thoughtfully during conversations about seating charts that resembled diplomatic negotiations, and expressed enthusiasm for menu tastings that cost more per plate than most families spent on groceries in a month. But my evenings belonged to David. We met 3 more times at carefully chosen locations far from my usual social haunts, and with each encounter, the gulf between my public life and my private desires grew wider. David introduced me to parts of the Bay Area I had never seen despite living here my entire life. We had dinner at a Vietnamese restaurant in San Jose, where the owner's grandmother prepared traditional dishes that weren't on any menu. We attended a community meeting about affordable housing development, where David spoke eloquently about sustainable construction practices that prioritized environmental responsibility over maximum profit margins. Most revelatory was an evening we spent at his apartment in Mountain View, a modest but comfortable space that reflected his personality in ways that made my parents' mansion suddenly feel like an elaborate stage set. His bookshelves contained everything from engineering textbooks to poetry collections, with particular emphasis on urban planning philosophy and social justice theory. The walls featured photographs from his infrastructure work in Guatemala and Honduras, images that captured both the technical complexity of his projects and their human impact on the communities they served. "You really spent 2 years building schools and water systems in Central America?" I asked, studying a photograph of David with a group of children standing in front of a newly completed elementary school. "Best job I ever had," he replied, settling beside me on his couch with 2 glasses of wine. The pay was terrible, the conditions were challenging, but the work felt genuinely meaningful in a way that corporate construction never did. "What brought you back to California?" David's expression grew thoughtful. "Family obligations, partly. My parents needed help with their business. But also, I realized that the same communities I was trying to help internationally exist right here in our own backyard. San Jose has neighborhoods with infrastructure challenges that rival anything I saw in Guatemala." I found myself leaning against his shoulder as he described his current project, the mixed-use development I had first noticed from my car window. What I had initially assumed was a standard commercial construction job was actually an innovative affordable housing initiative designed to revitalize a historically underserved neighborhood while preventing displacement of existing residents. "The financing structure is complex," David explained, his voice taking on the passionate intensity I had come to associate with his professional discussions. "We're working with community land trusts, cooperative ownership models, and green building incentives to create something that serves multiple stakeholders, rather than just maximizing developer profits." The depth of his knowledge and the sophistication of his approach impressed me more than any business presentation I had heard in years of family company meetings. This was exactly the kind of community-centered development I had mentioned during our first dinner, the type of project I had never imagined actually existed. "David," I said carefully, "what you're describing sounds incredibly complex from a financial and legal perspective. How did you learn to navigate all these different funding mechanisms and regulatory requirements?" He was quiet for a moment before responding. "I have a pretty good team supporting the project. My business partner handles most of the financial modeling, and we work with lawyers who specialize in community development." Something in his tone suggested there was more to the story, but before I could pursue the question further, he kissed me with an intensity that made coherent thought impossible. We spent the rest of the evening in his bed, making love with a passion that confirmed everything I had been trying to deny about the inadequacy of my relationship with Bradley. driving home at midnight, my body still humming with satisfaction, and my heart full of emotions I had never experienced before. I knew I was approaching a crisis point. I couldn't continue indefinitely maintaining these parallel existences, and the growing contrast between my authentic feelings for David and my obligatory relationship with Bradley was becoming unbearable. The crisis materialized sooner than I had anticipated. On a Thursday evening in early April, I returned from another dinner with David to find my parents waiting in the family room with expressions of barely contained fury. My mother was holding her phone with the kind of rigid control that suggested she was restraining herself from throwing it across the room. "Charlotte," my father said in the tone he reserved for business negotiations that had gone seriously wrong, "we need to discuss your recent activities." My stomach dropped as I realized that my careful geographic isolation strategy had somehow failed. "What do you mean?" My mother activated her phone and held up a photograph that made my blood run cold. It was an image of David and me walking, hand in hand, into the Vietnamese restaurant, clearly taken from across the street with a telephoto lens. The angle and quality suggested professional surveillance rather than accidental capture. "Margaret Ashworth was having lunch in Palo Alto today when her driver sent her this photo," my mother said, her voice vibrating with controlled rage. "Apparently, someone she knows noticed you in San Jose last week and thought she should be aware of your extracurricular activities." The betrayal felt like a physical blow. Margaret Ashworth, Bradley's aunt and one of San Francisco society's most notorious gossips, had maintained a network of informants throughout the Bay Area specifically to monitor the activities of family members and social rivals. I had underestimated the reach of their surveillance apparatus. "Who is this man?" my father demanded, studying the photograph with the clinical attention he brought to property acquisition due diligence. "And why are you holding hands with him when you're engaged to Bradley Ashworth?" I straightened my shoulders, drawing on reserves of courage I hadn't known I possessed. "His name is David Chen, and I'm holding hands with him because I care about him." The silence that followed was deafening. My parents exchanged a look that contained decades of matrimonial communication, and I realized they had already discussed their response strategy before confronting me. "Charlotte," my mother began in the patient tone she used when explaining social protocols to servants, "whatever romantic fantasies you may have developed about this person, they end immediately. You have obligations to this family and to the Ashworths that supersede any temporary infatuation." "It's not an infatuation," I replied, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. "I have genuine feelings for David that I've never experienced with Bradley or anyone else." My father's face flushed with the kind of anger that usually preceded his most ruthless business decisions. "Feelings are a luxury that people in our position cannot afford to indulge irresponsibly. Your marriage to Bradley represents a strategic alliance that will benefit both families for generations. Your personal preferences are irrelevant compared to those larger considerations." "My personal preferences are irrelevant to whom?" I asked, feeling a surge of rebellion that had been building for weeks. "They're my feelings, my marriage, my life. Shouldn't I have some input into these decisions?" My mother laughed, sound entirely devoid of warmth or humor. "Your life? Charlotte, dear, you've never supported yourself for a single day. Every privilege you've enjoyed, every opportunity you've received, every comfort you take for granted has been provided by this family. You don't have an independent life to make decisions about." The comment stung because it contained enough truth to be genuinely hurtful. I had indeed lived my entire existence within the cocoon of family wealth and protection, never testing my ability to survive or thrive independently. But recognizing my privileged dependence didn't automatically invalidate my right to emotional autonomy. "Perhaps it's time I learned to support myself," I said quietly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. My father set down his whiskey glass with deliberate precision before responding. If you pursue this relationship with this construction worker, you will discover exactly what supporting yourself entails, he said with cold finality. You will be removed from all family business activities, your credit cards will be canceled, your trust fund access will be suspended, and your residence in this house will be terminated immediately. My mother nodded in agreement, adding, "Your relationship with Bradley and his family will obviously be severed, along with all the social and professional connections that relationship provides. You'll find that the broader community has little interest in maintaining relationships with someone who has betrayed family loyalty in such a public manner." The threat was comprehensive and devastating, designed to strip away every aspect of the life I had known while leaving me completely isolated from support systems I had never realized I was dependent upon. But what struck me most forcefully wasn't the cruelty of their ultimatum, but the casual assumption that I would choose security over authenticity when forced to decide between them. "You're asking me to choose between my happiness and my family," I observed. "We're asking you to choose between a temporary indulgence and your responsibilities as a Pemberton," my father corrected. "The choice should be obvious to anyone with maturity and perspective." I looked around the family room where I had spent countless evenings discussing business strategies, social obligations, and family expectations. The Persian rugs, oil paintings, and antique furniture represented generations of Pemberton's success and stability. Everything in this room, including my presence in it, had been determined by decisions made long before my birth. "I need time to think," I said finally. "You have until Sunday," my mother replied curtly. "The Ashworths are hosting their annual spring charity gala on Monday evening, and you will attend with Bradley as his fiancé. Any other choice will result in the immediate implementation of the consequences we've outlined." I spent the weekend in a state of emotional paralysis, unable to concentrate on anything beyond the impossible choice my parents had presented. Cut off from David, whom I couldn't contact without risking further surveillance complications, I found myself truly alone for perhaps the first time in my life. On Sunday afternoon, I drove aimlessly through neighborhoods I had never explored, trying to imagine what my life would look like if I chose independence over security. The practical challenges were daunting. I had never held a job outside the family company, never paid my own bills, never navigated the world without the cushion of family wealth and connections. The Pemberton name opened doors throughout California that would slam shut the moment I was disowned. But as I drove through communities where David worked, neighborhoods where families lived meaningful lives despite lacking trust funds and inherited advantages, I began to question whether my privileged dependence was actually a form of gilded imprisonment. Every comfort my family provided came with corresponding obligations that limited my autonomy and authentic self-expression. The realization that crystallized during that long afternoon was both liberating and terrifying. I had spent 26 years accepting other people's definitions of success, happiness, and appropriate life choices without ever examining whether those definitions aligned with my own values and desires. My parents weren't just threatening to withdraw financial support. They were demanding that I surrender any claim to self-determination in exchange for continued comfort and security. That evening, I called David from a payphone outside a gas station in Redwood City, paranoid about my family monitoring my cell phone communications. "Charlotte, I've been worried about you. You didn't respond to my messages." "I can't talk long," I said, glancing around nervously. "My parents found out about us. They've given me an ultimatum." "What kind of ultimatum?" I explained the situation as concisely as possible, including the comprehensive threats my parents had made about cutting off all financial and social support if I refused to end our relationship. David was quiet for a long moment before responding. "What do you want to do?" The question was simple, but it represented the first time in days that anyone had asked about my preferences rather than my obligations. "I want to be with you," I said without hesitation. "But I'm terrified of what that choice will cost me." "Charlotte, I can't make this decision for you. but I can promise that whatever happens, you won't face it alone." The warmth in his voice gave me strength I hadn't known I possessed. "There's something else I need to tell you. The charity gala tomorrow night where I'm supposed to appear with Bradley? It's being held at the Ashworth Estate in Hillsborough. If I don't show up, there will be no possibility of reconciliation with my family." "Then show up," David said quietly. "Go to the gala, fulfill your obligation, and then make your choice with full knowledge of what you're walking away from." His suggestion was strategically sound, but it felt like postponing the inevitable rather than resolving the crisis. Nevertheless, I agreed to attend the charity gala as my final appearance in the role of Bradley's fiancé, before making my irrevocable decision about the direction of my life. The Ashworth Estate in Hillsborough was a testament to pharmaceutical fortune accumulated over 3 generations, featuring formal gardens, a ballroom that could accommodate 300 guests, and enough valuable art to stock a small museum. The annual Spring Charity Gala was one of the social season's most prestigious events, attracting San Francisco's elite to support whichever cause Eleanor Ashworth had designated as fashionable that year. I arrived wearing a pale blue gown that had required 3 fittings and cost more than most people earned in several months, my grandmother's sapphire necklace providing the kind of understated elegance that suggested old money rather than nouveau, riche ostentation. Bradley greeted me with his customary kiss on the cheek, a gesture that felt increasingly hollow after experiencing genuine passion with David. "You look beautiful, darling," Bradley said, offering his arm to escort me into the ballroom. "Mother has seated us with the Montgomerys and the Harringtons. Father wants to discuss the pharmaceutical research facility development with your parents during dinner." The evening proceeded exactly as such events always did, with carefully orchestrated conversations that served multiple social and business purposes simultaneously. I smiled appropriately during discussions of charity fundraising strategies, nodded thoughtfully when older men explained economic trends I understood better than they did, and accepted compliments on my engagement ring with the gracious modesty expected from someone in my position. But throughout the dinner, my mind kept drifting to David and the life I might be choosing to abandon. While the assembled guests discussed their latest vacation destinations and investment strategies, I found myself thinking about David's photographs from Guatemala and his passionate descriptions of community development projects that prioritized human welfare over profit maximization. The contrast between these two worlds felt increasingly stark as the evening progressed. The charity gala would raise substantial funds for worthy causes, but the underlying motivation seemed more focused on social positioning and tax benefits than genuine commitment to addressing systemic problems. David's work, by comparison, directly engaged with communities to create lasting improvements in people's daily lives. "Charlotte, dear, you seem distracted tonight," Eleanor Ashworth observed during a break between dinner courses. "I hope you're not feeling overwhelmed by wedding planning responsibilities. Just thinking about the future," I replied honestly, which seemed to satisfy her interpretation of my preoccupation. As the evening wound toward its conclusion with dancing and final fundraising appeals, I found myself standing on the Ashworth Estate's terrace, looking out over gardens that had been maintained by professional landscapers to achieve a perfection that nature could never accomplish independently. The metaphor felt appropriate for my entire life. Carefully cultivated, expensively maintained, and ultimately artificial. Bradley joined me on the terrace, loosening his bow tie with the satisfied expression of someone who had successfully fulfilled all social obligations for the evening. "Successful night," he commented, seemingly oblivious to my emotional turmoil. "Father sealed the research facility deal with your parents, and Mother raised more than expected for the Children's Hospital Foundation." "Bradley," I said carefully, "are you happy with our relationship?" He looked genuinely puzzled by the question. "Happy? Of course I'm happy. We're well suited, our families complement each other perfectly, and we share similar goals and values. What more could either of us want?" "Passion," I said quietly. "Love." the feeling that we chose each other rather than simply accepting arrangements made by other people. Bradley laughed, the same indulgent chuckle he used when I expressed opinions he considered charmingly naive. "Charlotte, darling, passion is what people settle for when they can't achieve genuine compatibility. We have something much more valuable than romantic infatuation. We have partnership based on mutual benefit and shared social position." His response confirmed everything I had been feeling about our relationship, but had been afraid to acknowledge directly. Bradley wasn't interested in passion or authentic emotional connection because he didn't value those things. He had found exactly what he wanted in our engagement: a socially appropriate wife who would fulfill expected roles without disrupting his comfortable existence. The realization was simultaneously heartbreaking and liberating. I wasn't denying Bradley something he desired. I was refusing to continue pretending that I could be satisfied with something I had never actually wanted. "I need to tell you something," I began. But before I could continue, my mother appeared on the terrace with the kind of determined expression that preceded her most decisive social maneuvers. "Charlotte, the Ashworths are ready to announce the research facility partnership and your wedding date. Eleanor wants you and Bradley to stand with the families for photographs." The moment had arrived for my final performance in the role I had been assigned at birth. As I followed my mother back into the ballroom, where 300 of San Francisco's most influential people waited to celebrate an engagement that represented everything I was preparing to reject, I felt a strange sense of closure. This would be the last time I stood before this audience as Charlotte Pemberton, dutiful daughter and appropriate fiancé. Whatever happened next, whatever challenges I would face as a result of choosing authenticity over security, I would face them as myself rather than as a character in someone else's carefully scripted production. The applause that greeted our appearance felt like a farewell rather than a celebration, marking the end of one version of my life and the beginning of something entirely unknown, but finally, genuinely mine. The next morning dawned gray and overcast, matching my emotional state as I sat in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by the trappings of a life I was preparing to abandon. The pale blue gown from the previous evening hung in my closet like a ghost of the woman I had been pretending to be, while my engagement ring sat on the nightstand where I had placed it after returning from the Ashworth estate. I had made my decision during the long, sleepless hours after midnight, but implementing it required a courage I wasn't certain I possessed. The practical implications of my choice were staggering. I would need to find somewhere to live, secure employment outside the family business, and learn to navigate the world without the safety net of inherited privilege that had cushioned every aspect of my existence. But more daunting than the practical challenges was the emotional cost of severing relationships with everyone I had known my entire life. My parents, despite their controlling behavior, genuinely believed they were protecting my best interests. Bradley, for all his limitations as a romantic partner, had never been deliberately cruel or manipulative. The extended network of family, friends, business associates, and social connections that comprised my entire world would view my choice as a betrayal of values they held sacred. I was about to discover what it meant to be truly alone in ways I had never imagined possible. My phone buzzed with a text message from David. "Whatever you decide, know that I believe in your strength and your right to choose your own path. Call me when you're ready." His words provided the final push I needed to move beyond contemplation into action. I dressed carefully in jeans and a simple sweater, clothes that would allow me to blend into the broader world rather than announcing my privileged background, and gathered the few possessions that felt genuinely mine rather than part of the Pemberton family collection. The most difficult item to pack was a photograph of my grandmother, my father's mother, who had died when I was 12. She had been the one person in my family who had consistently asked about my dreams and aspirations, rather than simply outlining expectations and obligations. I remembered her telling me once that the most important inheritance she could leave me wasn't money, but the knowledge that I was capable of creating my own life if I ever found the courage to try. At the time, her words had seemed abstract, almost meaningless within the context of my secure and predetermined existence. Now, they felt like a lifeline connecting me to a legacy of independence I had never known existed within my family history. I found my parents in the breakfast room, where they were reviewing financial documents with the grim efficiency that characterized their approach to most family business. They looked up as I entered, and I could see in their expressions that they were already preparing for the conversation they knew was coming. "I won't be attending any more wedding planning meetings," I announced without preamble. "I'm returning Bradley's ring and ending our engagement." My mother set down her coffee cup with deliberate precision. "Charlotte, we discussed the consequences of this choice. Are you prepared to accept them?" "I'm prepared to accept responsibility for my own life," I replied, placing Bradley's engagement ring on the breakfast table between us. "I understand that means losing access to family money, family connections, and this house. I understand that you'll probably never forgive me for choosing my own happiness over family obligations." My father's expression remained impassive, but I could see the disappointment and anger beneath his controlled exterior. "You're throwing away everything 3 generations of Pembertons have built to pursue an infatuation with someone whose background you know nothing about. Do you have any idea what kind of life awaits you outside this family?" "No," I admitted honestly, "but I know what kind of life awaits me if I stay, and I've realized that security without authenticity isn't actually security at all. It's just a comfortable prison." The silence that followed felt final, like the moment when a door closes permanently. My mother was the first to speak, her voice carefully controlled but edged with genuine hurt. "If you walk out of this house to pursue this relationship, don't expect to return when reality sets in. We won't be available to rescue you from the consequences of this foolish decision." "I understand," I said quietly. "I hope someday you'll understand that I'm not rejecting you or the family. I'm trying to become someone worthy of the Pemberton name by actually earning my place in the world, rather than simply inheriting it." I left through the front door with a single suitcase and my grandmother's photograph, climbing into my BMW for what I knew would be the last time. The car, like everything else I had considered mine, belonged to the family rather than to me. Personally, I would need to return it once I found alternative transportation. My first stop was Bradley's office in downtown San Francisco, where I needed to end our engagement face-to-face, rather than hiding behind text messages or intermediaries. The Ashworth Pharmaceuticals building occupied an entire block in the financial district, its glass and steel facade reflecting the kind of corporate success that my family had always admired and aspired to join. Bradley's assistant, a perfectly groomed woman who had always treated me with the deference appropriate to her employer's fiancé, looked confused when I asked to see him without an appointment. "Miss Pemberton, Mr. Ashworth is in a board meeting that was scheduled to continue until this afternoon. Would you like me to interrupt him, or would you prefer to wait?" "Please interrupt him," I said, recognizing that delaying the conversation would only make it more difficult. "Tell him it's urgent." Bradley emerged from the conference room 5 minutes later, still carrying the financial reports that had presumably been under discussion. His expression suggested mild annoyance at the interruption, rather than concern about potential emergency. "Charlotte, darling, what's so urgent that it couldn't wait until this evening? You know how Father feels about personal interruptions during business hours." I pulled his engagement ring from my purse and held it out to him. "I can't marry you, Bradley. I'm returning your ring and ending our engagement." He stared at the ring for several seconds as if unable to process what I was telling him. "This is about that construction worker, isn't it? Charlotte, you're making a catastrophic mistake based on romantic fantasies that have no basis in reality." "It's not about David specifically," I replied, though that wasn't entirely true. "It's about recognizing that I've never chosen anything important in my life, including our relationship. I need to discover who I am when I'm not fulfilling other people's expectations. Bradley's expression shifted from confusion to anger as the implications of my decision became clear. Do you have any idea what this will do to both our families? The business partnerships, the social connections, the wedding arrangements that have been planned for months? I know it will be difficult and embarrassing, I acknowledged, but continuing a marriage that would make both of us unhappy seems like a worse alternative. Unhappy? Bradley's voice rose enough to attract attention from nearby offices. Charlotte, we have everything anyone could want. Financial security, social position, family support, shared goals and values. How could you possibly be unhappy with that foundation? His genuine bewilderment confirmed everything I had realized about our fundamental incompatibility. Bradley wasn't wrong that we had shared many things, but we had never shared anything that mattered to me personally. Our relationship had been built on external circumstances rather than internal connection. I hope you find someone who wants the same things you want, I said sincerely. I hope she makes you happier than I ever could have. I left the ring on his desk and walked out of the Ashworth building, feeling both liberated and terrified by the finality of what I had just done. There would be no possibility of reconciliation now, no opportunity to reconsider if the challenges ahead proved too overwhelming to handle alone. My next stop was the Mountain View apartment where David was waiting with the kind of patient uncertainty that suggested he understood the magnitude of what I was risking. He opened the door before I could knock, having apparently been watching for my arrival. "How did it go?" he asked gently. "I'm officially homeless, unemployed, and disowned," I replied, attempting lightness but hearing the strain in my own voice. "But I'm free to make my own choices for the first time in my life." David pulled me into his arms, holding me with a combination of celebration and protective concern that made me feel both supported and valued in ways I had never experienced before. "What do you need right now?" he asked. "I need to find a job and a place to live," I said practically. "And I need to figure out how to function in the world without family money or connections." "You can stay here while you get organized," David offered immediately. "And I might know about some job opportunities that would match your background and interests." Over the following days, David helped me navigate the practical challenges of independent living with a patience and competence that impressed me more than any romantic gesture could have. He accompanied me to return the BMW to my parents' estate, where the housekeeper accepted the keys with obvious discomfort about my changed circumstances. He helped me open my first personal bank account using the modest savings I had accumulated from birthday and Christmas gifts over the years. He even located a reliable used car that would provide transportation without the conspicuous luxury that had previously marked me as a member of the privileged class. Most importantly, he connected me with Elena Rodriguez, a friend who worked in community development and was looking for someone with real estate expertise to help coordinate affordable housing projects throughout the Bay Area. The work was exactly the kind of community-centered development I had discussed with David during our early conversations, offering the opportunity to use my professional background in service of values I actually cared about. My first meeting with Elena took place in a coffee shop in East Palo Alto, a neighborhood I had never visited, despite living 20 minutes away my entire life. Elena was a dynamic woman in her 40s who had built her career advocating for housing justice and sustainable community development. She listened to my background with interest, but also with obvious questions about my motivations. "Charlotte, your resume is impressive, and your family's company has an excellent reputation in commercial development," she said carefully. "But this work pays a fraction of what you could earn in the private sector, and it involves a lot of community engagement with people who might be suspicious of someone from your background. What draws you to this kind of work?" I had anticipated this question and had spent considerable time thinking about how to answer it honestly. "I've realized that I've never done work that felt meaningful to me personally. My family's developments prioritize profit and exclusivity, but I'm more interested in creating housing that strengthens communities rather than displacing them. I know I have a lot to learn about community engagement, but I'm willing to start at the bottom and prove my commitment through results rather than just intentions. Elena's expression softened slightly. The pay really is terrible, and the work can be frustrating because progress is slow, and political obstacles are constant. But if you're genuinely interested in affordable housing advocacy, we could definitely use someone with your technical background and development experience. She offered me a position as a project coordinator, working on a mixed-income housing development in South Bay that was designed to provide affordable homeownership opportunities for teachers, firefighters, and other essential workers who had been priced out of the communities they served. The salary was less than I had spent on clothing in previous years, but the work was exactly what I had imagined doing during my conversations with David about community-centered development. I accepted immediately, feeling more excited about a job than I had ever felt about any aspect of my previous life. The first few weeks of my new existence were simultaneously exhilarating and overwhelming. Living with David in his modest apartment, working for a nonprofit organization, and navigating daily life without inherited privilege required adjustments I hadn't anticipated. I had to learn to grocery shop with budget constraints, to use public transportation when my used car needed repairs, and to cook meals rather than dining out whenever hunger struck. But the challenges were offset by a sense of authenticity and purpose I had never experienced before. My work with Elena's organization connected me to communities throughout the Bay Area, where families were building meaningful lives despite economic limitations that would have seemed impossible to overcome from my previous perspective. I met teachers who were passionate about education despite inadequate resources, small business owners who were creating jobs and services that strengthened their neighborhoods, and community leaders who were advocating for policy changes that would benefit people rather than property developers. Most surprisingly, I discovered that my privileged background, rather than being an insurmountable barrier to community acceptance, could actually be an asset when properly channeled. My familiarity with development financing, zoning regulations, and municipal approval processes helped Elena's organization navigate bureaucratic obstacles that had previously slowed their projects. My professional network, despite my family's disapproval, included contacts at banks, law firms, and government agencies who were willing to provide expertise and support for worthy affordable housing initiatives. Within 2 months, I had helped facilitate financing for 3 different community development projects, using connections and knowledge I had acquired through family business, but applying them to work that aligned with my personal values rather than simply generating maximum profit. The personal relationship with David also deepened in ways that confirmed my decision to choose authenticity over security. Living together revealed daily compatibility that extended far beyond the physical attraction and intellectual stimulation that had initially drawn us together. We shared domestic responsibilities naturally, supported each other's professional commitments, and discovered that we enjoyed even mundane activities like grocery shopping and household maintenance when we approached them as partners rather than as obligations. But the most significant development occurred on a Friday evening in late June, when David asked if I wanted to attend a community celebration for the completion of the affordable housing project I had first noticed from my car window months earlier. The mixed-use development was finally ready for occupancy, and the neighborhood was hosting a block party to welcome new residents and celebrate the collaborative effort that had made the project possible. I'd love to come, I agreed, genuinely, excited to see the finished project and meet some of the families who would be moving into the new housing. "There's something I should probably mention before we go," David said, with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. "Some of the people you'll meet tonight know more about my background than I've shared with you." I felt a flutter of concern. "What kind of background information?" "Nothing dramatic," he assured me quickly. "Just professional details that might surprise you." The block party was exactly the kind of community event I had learned to love during my months working in affordable housing development. Families with children played games in the street, while neighbors shared food and celebrated the completion of a project that would strengthen their community for generations. The development itself was even more impressive than I had realized, featuring innovative design elements that maximized both environmental sustainability and aesthetic appeal. David was clearly a beloved figure in the neighborhood, greeted enthusiastically by residents who credited him with ensuring that the project prioritized community input rather than imposing external developer preferences. But as the evening progressed, I began to notice references to his role that didn't align with my understanding of his position as a project supervisor. "David, the financing structure you designed for this project is brilliant," commented Maria Santos, a local city council member. "Using the community land trust model combined with cooperative ownership was exactly what we needed to prevent future displacement." I looked at David with growing confusion. "You designed the financing structure?" Before he could respond, Elena Rodriguez appeared beside us with a warm smile. "Charlotte, I don't think you've been properly introduced." To David Chen, founder and CEO of Sustainable Communities Development Corporation. "David, this is Charlotte Pemberton, the project coordinator I've been raving about." The world seemed to tilt sideways as I processed this information. "CEO?" I repeated stupidly. David's expression was a mixture of embarrassment and concern. "Charlotte, we need to talk." He guided me away from the crowd to a quiet area near the development's community garden, where we could speak privately without attracting attention from the celebration. "You're not a construction worker," I said, my mind struggling to reconcile this revelation with everything I thought I knew about him. "I never said I was a construction worker," David replied carefully. "You assumed that based on my clothes and the fact that I was directing construction activity. I didn't correct your assumption because I wanted you to get to know me without being influenced by preconceptions about my professional status or financial position." "What exactly do you do?" David took a deep breath before responding. "I founded Sustainable Communities Development Corporation 8 years ago after returning from Central America. We're a for-profit company that specializes in affordable housing and sustainable community development projects throughout California. The project where you first saw me is one of 12 developments we've completed in the past 3 years." The implications of this revelation began cascading through my consciousness. "How big is your company?" "We employ about 200 people directly and work with contractors and subcontractors throughout the state. Last year, we completed projects worth approximately $50 million in total value." I felt dizzy as I realized the magnitude of what he was telling me. "David, are you wealthy?" "That depends on how you define wealthy," he said carefully. "I'm financially comfortable, certainly more so than I was letting you believe. But my company's success is reinvested primarily into new projects, rather than personal luxury." "How financially comfortable?" David hesitated before answering. "My personal net worth is approximately $40 million, mostly tied up in company equity and real estate holdings." The number hit me like a physical blow. David wasn't just financially comfortable, he was significantly wealthier than my family. The construction clothes, the modest apartment, the used pickup truck he drove to work sites, all of it had been deliberately misleading rather than reflective of his actual circumstances. "You've been lying to me for months," I said, anger beginning to replace shock. "I never lied to you," David protested. "I just didn't volunteer information that I thought might change how you saw me. I wanted you to know me as a person before you knew me as a successful businessman. You let me believe you were someone you're not. You watched me struggle with the decision to give up my family's money to be with you, knowing that financial security wouldn't actually be an issue. Your decision to leave your family wasn't about money," David countered. "It was about choosing authenticity over obligation, about claiming your right to make your own choices. Those issues wouldn't have disappeared if you'd known about my financial situation. His argument was logical, but it didn't address the fundamental betrayal I felt at being deceived about something so significant. You should have told me the truth. I had a right to make informed decisions about my life. You're absolutely right, David acknowledged. I should have been honest with you from the beginning. I was afraid that if you knew about my success, you might wonder whether I was just another wealthy man trying to acquire something beautiful and rare rather than someone who genuinely cared about you as a person. So instead, you manipulated me into a relationship based on false premises. I fell in love with you, David said quietly. Everything about my feelings for you is genuine, regardless of the circumstances under which we met. I was wrong to withhold information that was relevant to your decisions, but my emotions and my commitment to you are completely real. I stared at him in the gathering darkness, trying to process the collision between the man I thought I had chosen and the reality of who he actually was. Part of me was furious at the deception, but another part was beginning to recognize the irony of the situation. David, do you realize what you've done? I've probably ruined the best relationship I've ever had by being afraid to trust you with the truth about my background. You've done something much more complicated than that, I said slowly. You've created exactly the scenario my parents were terrified of, but in reverse. David looked confused. What do you mean? They were afraid I was throwing away my inheritance to pursue a relationship with someone who couldn't provide financial security. Instead, I've accidentally found someone who's wealthier than my family and discovered that I can succeed professionally without inherited privilege. Does that change how you feel about your decision to leave? I considered the question seriously, recognizing its importance for both of us. No. I left my family because I needed to discover who I was when I wasn't fulfilling other people's expectations. That journey has been valuable regardless of your financial situation. But your deception does change how I feel about our relationship. What do you want to do? I looked around at the block party celebration, where families were enjoying the culmination of a project that would improve their lives for decades. David's company had created something genuinely valuable, something that aligned with every value I had discovered about myself during my months of independent living. I want you to tell me everything, I said finally. About your business, your background, your actual living situation, your future plans, everything you've been hiding. And then I want time to decide whether I can trust someone who thought deception was preferable to honesty, even if his intentions were good. David nodded seriously. What I can tell you right now is that my feelings for you have never been deceptive. I love your intelligence, your courage, your commitment to meaningful work, and your willingness to risk everything for authenticity. I fell in love with Charlotte Pemberton, not her family name or her inheritance. Then prove it, I said. Be honest with me about everything, and give me time to decide whether we can build something real together or whether this relationship was based on too many false premises to survive. Over the following weeks, David gradually revealed the full scope of his professional success and personal wealth. His modest apartment in Mountain View was indeed his primary residence, but he also owned a sustainable, eco-friendly house in the hills above Los Gatos and a small cabin near Lake Tahoe where he retreated for rest and strategic planning. His company occupied an entire floor of a downtown San Jose office building and was widely respected throughout California for innovative approaches to affordable housing development. Most surprisingly, he had been following my family's real estate developments for years, recognizing the Pemberton name as representing exactly the kind of exclusive, profit-focused approach to development that his company was designed to counter. He had known who I was from our first conversation at the coffee shop, though he hadn't expected to feel genuine attraction to someone from a background he had previously dismissed as privileged and out of touch. The revelation stung, but it also helped me understand why he had been reluctant to reveal his identity. In his mind, I represented everything he had built his career opposing, and my family's business practices were antithetical to his professional values. His deception, while still wrong, became more comprehensible when viewed as protective rather than manipulative. But what ultimately convinced me to continue our relationship wasn't David's explanations or apologies. It was the recognition that his success had been built on principles I genuinely admired, work that aligned with values I had discovered within myself during months of independent living and community engagement. David hadn't inherited his wealth or built it through extraction and exploitation. He had created a company that generated profit by solving social problems, providing affordable housing for working families while creating meaningful employment for hundreds of people. His financial success was a byproduct of work that made communities stronger rather than more divided. 3 months after the revelation at the block party, I accepted David's marriage proposal, offered not with an expensive ring, but with plans for a wedding that would be held at the community garden of the affordable housing development where we had first acknowledged our love for each other. But before we could move forward together, I knew I needed to attempt reconciliation with my family, not because I required their permission or approval, but because I wanted them to understand that my choices had been vindicated rather than punished by subsequent events. The phone call to my parents was one of the most difficult conversations of my life, but also one of the most important. I explained that I was engaged to David, that I had discovered meaningful work in affordable housing development, and that I wanted them to meet the man I planned to marry before making final judgments about my choices. "Charlotte," my mother said carefully, "we've heard rumors about your fiancé that suggest he may not be the construction worker we initially believed him to be. He's the founder and CEO of a sustainable development company," I confirmed. "He's also the man who helped me discover what I'm capable of achieving when I'm working toward goals I genuinely care about." My father was characteristically direct. "What exactly are you asking of us?" "I'm asking you to meet David and see for yourselves whether my choice in partner reflects good judgment or foolish rebellion. I'm asking you to consider whether the daughter who built a successful career in community development might have learned something valuable about business and life through her period of independence." The silence stretched for nearly a minute before my mother responded. "We would be willing to meet your fiancé under appropriate circumstances." Appropriate circumstances turned out to mean dinner at the Pemberton estate, with my parents. Bradley's parents and several other family friends invited to evaluate David according to their social and professional standards. The guest list was designed to create maximum pressure and scrutiny, but I accepted their terms because I was confident that David could handle any challenges they presented. The evening of the dinner party, I stood once again in the marble foyer of my childhood home, but this time as a guest rather than a resident. I wore a simple black dress I had purchased with money I had earned through my own work, paired with my grandmother's pearl necklace, the one piece of family jewelry I'd kept when I left. David arrived precisely on time, dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit that suggested both professional success and understated elegance. He had chosen to reveal his actual status gradually rather than attempting to hide it, and his appearance reflected the careful balance between authenticity and appropriate presentation. My parents greeted us in the living room with the kind of formal courtesy reserved for important business meetings. My father shook David's hand with obvious assessment, while my mother offered the sort of smile that could have meant anything from welcome to warning. "Mr. Chen," my father began, "Charlotte has told us about your work in community development. I understand you've had some success in affordable housing projects." "Some success, yes," David replied modestly. "My company has been fortunate to work on projects that align with community needs while remaining financially sustainable." Eleanor Ashworth, Bradley's mother, leaned forward with the kind of pointed interest that suggested she had been assigned to conduct preliminary interrogation. "And how exactly does one make affordable housing financially sustainable? It seems like those goals would be contradictory." David's response was comprehensive and sophisticated, outlining innovative financing structures, government incentive programs, and sustainable building practices that allowed his company to provide quality housing at below-market rates while maintaining healthy profit margins. His explanation impressed even my father, who had initially approached the conversation with obvious skepticism. As the evening progressed, it became increasingly clear that David was not what any of the assembled guests had expected. His educational background was impeccable, his business knowledge was extensive, and his professional achievements were substantial enough to command respect from even the most demanding critics. But the moment that truly transformed the evening occurred when my father asked about David's long-term business strategy and financial projections. My company's 5-year plan includes expansion throughout the western United States, with particular focus on markets where housing costs have priced out essential workers, David explained. We're projecting revenue growth of approximately 15% annually, with corresponding increases in both affordable housing units produced and permanent employment created. What kind of capital investment would that expansion require? My father pressed. Approximately $200 million over 5 years, though we're exploring several financing options including public-private partnerships, social impact bonds, and traditional private equity investment. My mother and father exchanged a look that I recognized from my childhood as their silent communication about unexpected business opportunities. That's quite ambitious, my father observed. Have you identified potential investors for such a substantial expansion? We're in preliminary discussions with several groups, but we're being selective about partners who share our commitment to community benefit rather than simply maximizing returns. What followed was a conversation that lasted well past the planned end of the dinner party, with my father and David discussing financing structures, regulatory challenges, and market opportunities, with the kind of enthusiasm that characterized my father's approach to promising business ventures. By the time the evening concluded, it was clear that David had not only met my family's standards, but had impressed them with possibilities they hadn't anticipated. My parents walked us to the door with expressions that suggested they were reassessing everything they had assumed about my judgment and my choices. "Mr. Chen," my mother said as we prepared to leave, "I hope you'll consider us potential partners in your expansion plans. The Pemberton family has considerable experience in real estate development and significant capital available for worthy investments." David smiled with genuine warmth. "I would welcome the opportunity to explore collaboration between our companies, particularly if it means working more closely with Charlotte's family." After we departed, driving away from the estate in David's Tesla rather than my former BMW, I realized that the evening had accomplished something I hadn't expected. My parents hadn't just accepted David. They had recognized him as someone whose success and values aligned with their own business interests. "That went better than I anticipated," David observed as we drove through the hills toward his house in Los Gatos. "They're going to want to invest in your company," I predicted. "Would that bother you?" I considered the question carefully. "No, I think it would actually be perfect. They'd be supporting work that benefits communities, rather than just accumulating wealth, and you'd have partners who understand development and financing. Everyone wins." 6 months later, we were married in the community garden of the affordable housing development where David had first revealed his true identity. The wedding was attended by a unique combination of community leaders, affordable housing advocates, my family and their business associates, and David's employees and collaborators from throughout California. My parents not only attended, but had become genuine enthusiasts for David's work, having invested substantially in Sustainable Communities Development Corporation and joined the board of directors. The partnership had exceeded everyone's expectations, combining David's innovative approach to community development with my family's capital and expertise in traditional real estate markets. Most importantly, I had discovered that choosing authenticity over security had led to both authentic happiness and genuine security, just not in the ways I had originally expected. I had left my family to pursue independence, and had found a partner whose success exceeded anything I could have achieved through inherited privilege. I had rejected an arranged marriage and had found genuine love with someone who valued my intelligence, ambition, and commitment to meaningful work. The emerald engagement ring David had given me, ethically sourced and designed by a local artisan, represented everything my original engagement ring had not: choice rather than obligation, partnership rather than acquisition, love rather than arrangement. As we danced together in the community garden surrounded by people whose lives had been improved by our collaborative work, I understood that the most valuable inheritance my grandmother had left me wasn't money or social position. It was the knowledge that authentic happiness could only be achieved by choosing courage over comfort, even when the path forward seemed impossible to navigate. The woman who had once been afraid to disappoint her parents had become someone capable of building her own life according to her own values. The privilege I had inherited was real, but the strength I had discovered within myself was more valuable than any trust fund or family connection. And the man I had chosen to marry had helped me realize that true partnership isn't about merging compatible backgrounds, but about supporting each other's growth into the people we are meant to become, even when that growth requires difficult choices and uncertain paths. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.